Hello, colleagues at Lumen. This is Professor Eric Gilder, and I'm sending my plenary presentation PowerPoint for your review. So I'll begin. Okay. The title of the presentation is the Past a Prologue, Construing Future Possibilities Amidst Present Perditions in a Continuing Time of Crisis. You see here the abstract. I'm referring to my last presentation. Was dealing with issues of logos, pathos, ethical practices across selves, time, and space in a pandemic era. And over the last year of dealing with COVID-19 and being locked up, basically, I've been thinking a lot about this further, drawing from people like George Kelly, Kenneth Boulding, Kenneth Burke, and Marshall McLuhan. So now I'm going to talk about some insights on this to deal with what we call, when you have a crisis, you can call it a turning point, status of crisis, and on these, building these bridges within us, that I'm drawing from the Lumen publicity here. The idea is I'm going to take the themes of the conference and apply them through the eyes of these social theorists and so forth. So that's where we're going. Drawing from the previous presentation, I had quoted Bannister, or a fellow named Mayer, quoted by Bannister, who was a psychologist in Kelly's tradition. And he was talking about the notion of we have a self as a community of selves, referring to, two persons or more. When I'm teaching communication theory, I often refer to this as intra-personal communication. That is, we have a voice within ourselves. We are our own first audience, as Perlman would say. And therefore, we first talk with ourselves. And we use the selves to get inside each other. And of course, this conversation comes from not only our oral interlocutors that we might have around us, but also our reading and our intellectual heritage. So this is the point I'm going to make there, is, we start there and work outwards to others. And of course, as I pointed out last time, and this comes from my habilitation thesis when I was thinking about the future, one issue we as academics, especially in the humanities space, is the problem of voice. How do we get our voice in this realm of multiple selves? How do we develop our own voice, but which is individually ours, but also builds on and works with the data we already have, or the philosophies we already have. Sometimes you feel a little bit overwhelmed in the sense that we say philosophy is all footnotes to Plato. We might ask, well, what can we add? But we can always add something. And I quote here some thought quotes from the different scholars I'm going to be looking at, and key quotes. And as George Kelly, the psychologist, has said, to living creature, then, the universe is real but not inexorable unless he chooses to construe it that way. So, and this is true with crisis as well. Kenneth Boulding. There is also a problem in epistemological ecology, if that's the word for it, of knowledge pollution. This is the spread of nonsense. We certainly have a lot of that when it comes to vaccines and such, and with COVID. Kenneth Burke. The progress of human enlightenment can go no further than picturing people not as vicious, but as mistaken. When you add that people are necessarily mistaken, that all people are exposed to situations which they must act as fools, then every insight contains its own special kind of blindness. You complete the comic cycle, returning again to the lesson humility that underlies great tragedy. The whole issue here with our politics and such is, again, we're personalizing it through identities and making it where we attack persons and we assume that they're vicious. I find Kenneth Burke's comic corrective more humanistic and hopeful. Marshall McLuhan. My work is designed for the pragmatic purpose of trying to understand our technological environment and its psychic and social consequences. And he goes on and talks about that and his probes. The approach here, again, I'm using my personal functional model behind it based on Aristotle, as I talked before, and the social role models. And then also looking at John Rawson's perspectives, talking about systems, souls, and societies. And this idea of the comic correctives, as I mentioned, Kenneth Burke, the notion of keeping us sane at this time of crisis. Okay, so we have the themes of the Logos conference, the Lumen conference here, and I'm playing on the themes from the paper, call for papers, but saying, okay, let's look at each of these concepts through the different eyes of the different theorists I point to. For instance, Logos. Kelly says, or a scholar of Kelly, would basically say he's looking for dichotomous constructs, hedonistic versus reflective, voluntary versus involuntary, conceptual versus body affective. These are not effectively understood as belonging to interacting states of being, but they're differential ways of thinking, what he calls structures of transition. In personal construct psychology, there's no self-inherent entities, neither in the guise of effects or attended objects. Okay, so one thing Kelly does in his personal construct psychology, he doesn't, split it in the normal ways that most psychologists had done, cognitive, affective, and conative. He says no, it's just a way of construing, making sense with hierarchical ordered dichotomous constructs that relate to each other in the person's mind. So Logos comes from there for Kelly. From Boulding, now Boulding, Kenneth Boulding, sort of an ecological theorist, one student of his talked about different ways in transdisciplinary events, how we could split up Logos and think about it. And he's following Boulding's lead here in talking about different disciplines and subdisciplines and economics, philosophy, psychology, science, and technology. And Boulding was a very broad thinker. So he would think about, you'd have different concepts of Logos depending on the discipline and the subdiscipline. Burke, Kenneth Burke. Now, Kenneth Burke, of course, a literary critic, theorist, also a social critic, theorist, self-taught, brilliant, resurrected the field of rhetoric with the use of dramatism. So in here, a scholar of Burke talks about, just as Gorgeous had argued that Logos is not substance in existing things, so that Burke contends that cultural concepts are not realities, but interpretations of reality. So he quotes us there. And of course, we can use words to, if Burke would say we can use words to reflect reality, well, we can also use it to deflect reality as well, and mislead people if we want, and ourselves. McLuhan, Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist, one scholar, Anton, had said that McLuhan's work on media and media structures re-enlivens interest in Logos, and notion of Logos, like John Dewey, relies upon a transitive regulative order. It doesn't sit on that, or it doesn't sit on operating inside the individual, but it works through the social relations and media. Logos can best be understood by attending to ways that communication patterns and communication technologies, much more than efficient materials, have altered and extended the range of formal and final causes. So the implication here is the way communication patterns and communication technologies, much more than mere efficient materials, have done the work with Logos. In other words, McLuhan is saying our media affects the way we even think. Let's talk about universality now. Kelly has in a passage, Introduction of Construct Theory back in 1966, had said, well, who can say what nature is? Is it what exists around us, including all the tiny hidden things that wait so patiently to be discovered? Or is the vista of all that is destined to occur, whether tomorrow or in some distant scan of time, eon of time? Or is nature infinitely more varied than this, the myriad trains of events that might ensue if we were to be so bold and ingenious and irreverent to take a hand in its management? Now, coming from personal construct theory, neither offers or demands a firm answer to any of these questions, and in this respect is unique. So rather than depending upon bedrock assumptions about the inherent nature of the universe or upon fragments of truth believed to have accumulated, is a notion about how man may launch out from a position of immediate ignorance and aspire to figure out the future for himself. Boulding, talking about universality, a scholar, a reviewer of Boulding, economist, talks about this and says, in imaginative ways, Boulding continues the reclaiming of social inquiry from determinists and teleologists. Biological evolution has no grand design or teleological unfolding. It evolves as genetic and mutational circumstances direct. But social evolution is substantially discretionary. We as human beings do in the main direct and guide our own future. Boulding sees a universal account of social evolution in order to inform and equip those who do or can exercise such discretion. So in this way, he agrees with Boulding, agrees with Kelly. Universality, Burke. Now, Burke is one of these scholars, self-taught, who, like I said, revolutionized the field of communication study in the 60s and 70s. And the situation here, one critic, Bernard Brock, had said, well, Kenneth Burke is in danger of becoming a modern-day Aristotle used for everything. Most communication scholars have read some of Burke's work and are aware of the flexibility of his rhetorical theory. And Burke has himself even argues that he has a general theory. So the idea of general theory is that they can be used for everything. Okay. But the danger could be that a theory required to do everything does very little in practice because it's too general. I don't know if I agree with Brock's criticism here, because you can use Burke's pentad, dramatistic pentad, in very structured and useful ways to find actual findings. McLuhan on universality. Now, again, McLuhan is looking at the universality here is the effect, the molding influence of technology on culture. That's the key. Technology may not determine culture in many ways, but by its nature and influence on people, it will shape and control the form of human association and action. And then he talks about the electric light being pure information, a medium without a message. Mentality. Kelly talks about this mentality. Do we come to the world positively in mind or negatively, or how do we deal with it? Kelly's main message in his work, later work, is that he cannot define sin by referring to any sacred text or any other authority. Sin is designed personally and is to be understood in terms of deviation from one's core role, the role of our life that we see in our own personal constructs. Core role concerns how we evaluate ourselves in the light of the perception of others that are central to us. So, and that's the issue here. So, sin would be deviating from your own true self in a way. Okay. Mentality by Boulding. Now, Boulding was very interested early on in ecology, and the issue here would be about economics and the relation to the earth. And way back in 1966, he had mentioned a notion about the open economy as the cowboy economy, the cowboy being symbolically illimitable plans and associated with recklessness, exploitive, romantic, violent behavior of open societies, the capitalist open society. The closed economy of the future, and he's thinking here of a spaceship or a spaceman economy, where you have an enclosed area that you have to live in, like when they go up to the space station. People have to live within that space and cooperate and deal with the limits, very brutal limits. So, and there's been, of course, people who lived in experimental communities inside enclosed ecological spaces, trying to see if they can get along over a long period of time and also be sustainable. So he talks about the difference in mentality between a cowboy economy, open economy, but conquering versus a spaceman economy, where we have limits and you have to live with that in a cyclical ecological system. So, in Burke, dealing mentality, the notion is that he talks about the existential principle. I hope I'm saying that right. That each scientific specialty is like the situation of an author has an idea for a novel and will be growing into something. So it's this notion about the acorn will turn into the tree and so forth, oak tree. And the same thing is applied to someone who writes. Okay. Burke has argued that the novelist and the engineer produce artifacts and rhetorics according to their respective trained incapacities that goaded them into broad perfection. Both technological invention and rhetorical invention, aiming for perfection, tended to end up threatening life itself. So Burke talks about this decalogue and about people being goaded by the spirit of hierarchy, definition of man, and this or the structure of language, the very core of the things that divide us versus things that unify us are built in the hierarchy of language and our symbol making capacities. McLuhan talks about the media ecology. As Boulding was talking about economic ecology and ecological ecology, media ecology comes out of McLuhan's ideas. Okay. All right. So the idea here is that, of course, people have argued with McLuhan, and a follower of McLuhan's thought, Neil Postman, talks about technological change as ecological. Yeah, and as we have new technologies that has ecological effects beyond it, the media. Okay. And McLuhan, when he would always say exaggerated things to make a point, and he had argued actually that nature was obsolete, that thanks to media technology, and he says the year that they launched Sputnik and circled the globe, the planet became programmable content and ecology was born. The meaning that we had Sputnik's launch was a way of saying that man had really topped nature and now would control it. I don't know if that's quite true, but the Earth is now an art form, according to McLuhan. Education. Kelly drew upon, now this was interesting, when Kelly was first a young person getting through his school, he did first in engineering and mathematics and then in psychology. At some point he was doing some, part-time counseling, and he had a situation where a friend, a patient, was shy and withdrawn, and this he encouraged him to. He was playing a role like King in Shakespeare's play, King Richard, I believe it was, and the idea is that he encouraged him to play the role, and the person played the role and did very well. Because why? Because it was a fictive role, and it therefore didn't threaten the person's constructs of themselves. But over time, it allowed the person to explore new aspects of his personality and come to have more assertive, personality in real life. Education from Boulding, about Boulding's overall project regarded as a personal endorsement of the notion that the only proper place for interdisciplinary studies is inside one's skull. His findings, in brief, are that it's only in the 20th century the world has become something like a single social system, and that is because the human race of the world has become much more of a total biological system than it was before. And then although the human race represents an evolutionary catastrophe, the rest of the biosphere, and what characterizes our position with respect to Earth as total physical system is out of our profound ignorance. Now what this is trying to say, again, this notion of man controlling nature and taking charge of it, we now, Boulding's view is he uses an organic metaphor, biological metaphor, but biological change takes a long time to happen. But learning, the learning that we underdo, like at this conference, can happen very quickly. And with learning, humans can change the environment and their situations very quickly. And of course, this has good and bad aspects when it comes to the total environment. It's the idea is, we still don't know a lot about our interactions with the larger ecology, and this goes back to Boulding's notion of the cowboy economy versus the spaceman economy. Burke was interesting. He was using the notion of literature as equipment for living, as tools for dealing with encountered situations, and using proverbs from literature as a way of dealing with situations. And of course, in his pentad that we talked about before, he thought he had 5 elements there, but he thought about adding a 6th element called attitude. And here is the idea. He was trying to think about using literature as equipment for living should neither be seen as completely conscious nor as especially methodological. If literature is equipment for living and functions like proverbs that are strategies for dealing with situations, and strategies are attitudes, then clearly attitudes are equipment for living. It's sort of an orientation. So Burke's view of education would draw from this, that we should look to literature as a way of living through things that we might not want to live through directly. I mean, we often read literature, situations in literature that excite us. If we read in a novel, doesn't mean that we would want to live that ourselves, but it allows us to anticipate life and make choices, and this is true. McLuhan talks about, he talked about back in 1967, he had talked about schooling in the United States and elsewhere. And of course, this sounds very present day, even though it was written many years back. The signals say about our education system that something is out of phase, that most present-day schools may lavish vast and increasing amounts of time and energy preparing students for a world that no longer exists. Though this is a time of educational experiments, the real reforms that might be expected have touched only a small proportion of our schools. And in an age where states, institutions, and banks and insurance companies have been altered almost beyond recognition, today's typical classroom, physical layout, content instruction still is pretty traditional in many parts of the world and the United States in some cases. The idea here, McLuhan had a metaphor of what he called rear view mirror vision. The idea, like when you're driving down the road and you have your rear view mirror in the car, we can only know from where we came, and we're often looking backwards instead of forwards when we're dealing with the future. We're coming up with structures for the last war, for the last crisis. We're going to end up with the pandemic, of course, changing everything, but that's going to become a new model that we will then use for future pandemics or other situations of similar scope. Novelty. Kelly had stated that therapeutic technique of playing games, video games and such, is psychologically safe because it's foreign to the client's life, it's novel, and the game and its metaphors provide a canvas for reimagining life. And again, this is a way of fictive worlds allow us to play. This concept of play reduces the risk, reduces threat, and people then can learn and develop. Okay. So, novelty. Boulding says, no, that, as I said, that was Kelly on novelty, and now Boulding on novelty Is information not measure energy that's the real driving factor in the production of genotypes, the whole evolutionary process? Energy and materials are significant mainly as coders of information. Information itself becomes more complex in the course of evolution. So he talks about in biological terms, but also in learning terms and technological terms. So the idea is the information, whether it's in genetic code or whether it's in a book or online, this information is going to be the real driving factor for our development. What he would call an evolutionary shockwave. Now, novelty from Burke's point of view. Throughout his writings, Burke says and shows that words are actions reflecting ethical decisions, and it follows that even in a motivational jungle, another person's meaning should be respected as that of a person's own, particularly if communication, coping, or goals is symbolic action. Okay. Novelty from McLuhan's point of view. A critic of McLuhan had said, what challenges us with McLuhan in his ideas is beyond their contemporary flair is a rare combination of intellectual novelty and comprehensiveness. When he asked us to consider with him no less than a field theory of all human culture, behavior, and productivity seen as emergent upon a historical stage, what he proposes is a comprehensive answer to the cosmic rhetorical questions raised by Henry Adams at the beginning of our mad century, and led to us in his 50 years of legacy. Okay. The ground of his appeal is acceptance of the very elements in our runaway technological age would normally have led pundits to predict with foreboding and opt for the past. Okay. So McLuhan, by taking all cultural phenomena as providence, proposes revolution in our pre-science, comparable with our potentially revolutionary science and technology. In the realm of aesthetics, for example, he asserts that the electron matter or content is being transmuted into energy. Okay. The parallel to Einstein is at least interesting. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And then I won't spend time on this, but in the larger presentation, I can talk about how I would use my models shown here to analyze these statements and responses to culture by our theorists that I've mentioned, both personal functional level and the social roles model that I developed over time. And then to conclude, this was written so many years ago at a different time, but it's funny how timely it is. Jane Boutwell, Paul Baudier, Constance Freely, and Brendan Gill had written about is notoriously a time of crisis, most of them false. A crisis is a turning point, and the affairs of the world don't turn as radically or as often as the daily papers would have us believe. Ever so often, though, we're stopped dead by a crisis that we recognize at once as a genuine article. We recognize it not by size, but because in the course of it, for a measurable anguished period, sometimes only minutes, sometimes hours, rarely as much as a day, nothing happens, truly nothing. It is the moment of stasis between a deed that has been performed and must be responded to, and the deed that will respond to it. At a false turning point, we nearly always know within limits what will happen next. At a true turning point, we not only know nothing, we know something much more extraordinary, more terrifying that nobody knows. That truly nobody. So thank you for your attention. So thank you, colleagues, for your attention, and I hope this is sufficient, and I look forward to seeing you online later in May. Thank you.